you put those two things together, that interest in the personal and that fascination with political concepts and events of political upheaval. And that to me is what can create or what can help me build a rhythm and a personal narrative that can dovetail with the flashpoints of the political convulsions that occur periodically throughout the novel. It's sort of like thinking of the nation as a person.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
But sometimes you fall out of the sky, and your house is still up there, and choice ain't something you can reach anymore.
Nice. I'm Sean.
I'm Trish.
And tonight we are joined by Tochi Onyebuchi. Welcome to the show, Tochi.
Thank you for having me.
Most welcome. So, Tochi is the author of the multiple award-nominated and winning Riot Baby, Goliath, and The Beast Made of Night, and the War Girls series. His short fiction has appeared in best of anthologies, including the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. His nonfiction includes the book Skinfolk and has appeared in the New York Times, NPR, and the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy. Well, I didn't know that was a journal. I'm going to have to look that up. I want to see what cool stuff is in there, among other places.
But tonight, Tochi is here to talk to us about his new, hard-boiled fantasy noir novel, Harmattan Season. Thank you very much for joining us today to talk about this.
I'm happy and honored to be here.
Before we get into questions for Tochi, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't here already, join us on Twitch for Sean's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 Central, 8 Eastern to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. Finally, please review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watches, and other special Patreon-only events on Discord.
All right, Tochi. First big question of the day. Can you tell us a little bit about Harmattan Season?
Yeah, so back in 2008, when I was a young warthog, I took a college class on detective fiction. And there I was introduced to Dashiell Hammett, Ray Chandler, G.K. Chesterton, the greats, right? The Mount Rushmore of detective fiction. And around the same time, I was watching this little heard about show called The Wire, which was and probably is, one of the, I say this without hyperbole, one of the greatest TV shows of all time, for all you youngins out there. I know, right? But it's, it starts off, particularly in season one, as essentially a crime show. And so, detective fiction and crime fiction for me from the very beginning were very sort of intertwined. And I kind of got the bug there because I was reading a lot of crime fiction and detective fiction. I was studying it and just really admiring the form. And, then I, started doing a lot more sort of nakedly speculative fiction stuff, and things kind of took off from there. But I was trying to figure out, especially after Goliath, how could I do something completely different, right? Something that also wasn't as impenetrable as that book was. How can I do something that was kind of sneakily complicated, right? Where you can follow along, you can tell what's going on and everything like that, but scratch a little bit beneath the surface and you're like, oh, okay. In the tradition of like so many of my favorite, crime novels, which like when you really think about them, crime fiction is like the social novels of like 19th century France and Russia. Like you will see a lot of the same stuff in Zola and like Dennis Lahane's Mystic River, right? Like it's like that, like Clockers by Richard Price, great American novel, like right up there with Absalom and Moby Dick. Like I will die on that hill. But that's sort of where it came from for me, was what is a form that I could play with that's kind of accessible while at the same time a place where, it's a box that's big enough to hide a lot of really interesting and important things.
So you're describing writing a novel that is inspired by detective fiction that then you used to hide clues like the criminal in a detective story would.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. You found my plan.
That's possibly the most meta thing I have ever heard anybody say on this show about their book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that point about
Well, I guess
the Russian and French literature of the 1800s, because, I mean, I suppose you can read Anna Karenina as just a romance novel if you really narrow your focus. But you're missing a whole lot. And so, yeah, like this for crime fiction, there's so much of the crimes and what is considered criminal and why people are doing things is underpinned by what's going on in society.
Exactly.
So I suppose the first question we should really start with then should be talking about the sort of form of the novel, because as we've obviously revealed now, there is a lot of sort of the hard-boiled noir elements in this book. And you've mentioned some of your influences. And I guess I want to flip the question, instead of going like, oh, how did your influences influence you? But how did the unique Tochi come through as you were sort of taking this very well-established form and sort of making something your own?
I think the setting. I think one of the things that I wanted to do that I hadn't necessarily seen before, which is kind of the driving impulse behind like all my writing, is like I don't want to write a thing that I've already read. But I wanted to see what it could look like when you had detective fiction or crime fiction embedded in a world that was actively dealing with colonialism and all the sort of in between spaces that can exist in that type of situation. The different people in their different worlds, and there's always people sort of navigating through those worlds, going back or going forth, or infiltrating one or infiltrating another. There's Dan Festerman, who's actually like he's a very formative influence for me. He wrote this one book. I mean, I think it's called The Small Boat of Great Sorrows. That's set during the Bosnian War, and it's about a Bosnian police detective investigating a murder in the context of this war that is going on, where all these people are dying. I thought that was fascinating. Like that, it was absolutely mind blowing. It's so interesting, and there's so many. It says so much about like perspective and things like mission and how much a life is worth and all of that stuff. And so I think from there I got the idea that a mystery, a piece of crime fiction could be really interesting if you set it in a politically charged place. And so that's sort of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to put my own unique spin on it, is like, hey, there's this place there where there's very interesting political stuff happening. There's maybe an election on the horizon. People are turning up dead. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the deaths in particular, right? They have political meaning too, because who dies in this particular book can really matter a great deal. And naturally, it comes up a number of times in the book. Who is doing the killing and why may also affect that, which I really love, where you kind of dance between those tensions and you have your main character ask that question several times of like, who is it? Because the answer to that question immediately makes the politics of this scenario like light on fire, basically.
Absolutely.
Right? If it's French people killing the local indigenous population, that has a whole different connotation than the opposite way, and the consequences are very different.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And
That's
of course,
very clever. I like
you
it.
also have the contrast between the individual killings or deaths, at least, that you find out about there's just one at the beginning, and then you find out there have been other individual killings before that. And then all of a sudden, things start happening where large numbers of people are dying and property is being destroyed. Oh no! And so but we still have our main guy trying to find out what's happening with the individual killings, despite all the chaos going on around him.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting juxtaposition. And I think by having a main character who's so mission driven and so mission focused, it was a way of keeping that perspective because it would have been very easy for the story to sort of lose itself in the escalating stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the heart of this is a person who went missing and perished, and all the questions that surround that human being, that life. Like, it's this assertion that that person mattered. And that I think is such a powerful assumption to carry through an entire story, to carry through an entire sort of situation as like the world is going literally topsy turvy around you.
And I think Abuba actually says it at one point. I can't remember if it's in the kind of terrifying nightmare sequence, or maybe it's immediately after that, or immediately before. It's in that part of the book where he basically questions this of like, does she have nobody? This individual who dies very early in the book, did they have nobody to care for her, and like how sad that would be if nobody cares? And it's almost like at that moment he's like, but I'm going to care.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be me. If they have nobody else, it'll be me. It's a very good little moment in there. I don't have a question. Sorry.
No,
I just
keep
sometimes like
going.
to just observe things.
I'll take it all. I'll take it all.
Well, let me ask a question that is about the setting, since we've raised the setting, and then this, I know Trish has a question that'll bounce immediately after this. After this, it's set in a West African country, or set in a West African space. This novel very immediately made me think of Algeria. And I assume that was at least somewhat intentional, because that I immediately went to, the Algerian War, and was thinking about how you were positioning the novel as set either in like the days leading up to the Algerian War or the days immediately after, depending on how you want to sort of interpret the novel. And I was kind of curious how you were weaving very real history into this, and how that process worked as you were building this detective story as the main plot, right? How you're building all that into this.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I decided to use this sort of unnamed West African polity, is because it would allow me to sort of pick different elements from the colonial history of Francophone Africa
Mm-hmm.
and try to put them into this cohesive space where I could comment on all these different things. And so you're absolutely right to pick up on the sort of allusions to the Algerian War for Independence. I That was like a huge thing in the back of my mind as I was putting together the history and the backstory of this place. Also, little bit of a tangent, but I think the Battle of Algiers is one of the greatest movies ever made, like ever. Any genre, any decade, any whatever, like put it up right there next to Citizen Kane or whatever you want to do. Battle of Algiers is one of the greatest movies ever made. And so I mean that speaks to the impact that it's had on me. But like that was very much a part of what I wanted to get into thematically, but also like politically with the book. And there's also other countries in Francophone West Africa, like Mali and what have you, that were were part of the building blocks of this world. But yeah, no, there's definitely some Algeria in there.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm glad I caught on. For the French Empire is the one I know the least about, because I focus primarily on the British Empire and the Spanish because of my research areas. But I know a little bit about, and I agree with you 100%. Battle of Algiers is an exceptional film, and folks should absolutely watch it.
Yes, the Criterion actually has special editions on Blu-ray and DVD. Wink,
Cool.
wink, nudge, nudge.
Excellent. I'm gonna go buy it.
So I was talking with Sean about this a little bit before the show about the Macmillan promotional copy calls it post-colonial West Africa, and I was wondering, is it really post-colonial since the French still have so much power and they're still moving to this polity in Africa and displacing the locals from the good jobs and stuff. So how post is post? And of course that's an ongoing issue for a lot of countries that have
No,
colonial
absolutely.
histories.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it really goes to show just how fluid and how gray the post and post-colonial can be. You can still have, I mean, and that's why there's neo-colonialism, but you can still have situations where there's nominally been, you know, independence granted or a country's name has been changed or something
Mm.
like that. There's been some announced shifts in the relationship between the quote unquote former colony and the quote unquote former colonial power, but you're still seeing some of the same dynamics replicated, particularly with residential segregation. These people live on this part of the city or this in this area of the country, and everybody else lives in these other parts, or all the business interests happen to be run by people of a
Mm-hmm.
certain pigmented persuasion, that sort of thing. Nominally, the place can have its own flag and has its own name and things of that sort, but how free is free. And so that I think the post and post colonial is an interesting is an it's very I guess you could say rich for
Mm.
exploration. And it really does go to speak to the variety of colonial and post-colonial experiences that there are and that there have been. What happened in Nigeria is not what happened in Congo, is not what happened in
Mm-hmm.
Algeria, is not what happened in Angola. All very, very different histories, all very like fascinating and specific in their own, while at the same time having these really interesting commonalities that sort of transcend the specificities of the situation.
I want to ask more about this actually because this is great. That you'd mentioned that there's a lot of attention to the details of sort of the lived experience essentially of being in here, and one of the elements is our main character in particular has a very betweenness to him where he sort of doesn't really belong in any space. He can't be considered, he'll never be considered French, for example, but he's also sort of rejected by his own people, and we see that played out in a lot of very different ways in the novel, sometimes very overtly, where it's just outright rejection, and sometimes much more subtly, where it's like little things. And I was hoping you'd kind of talk about what you kind of wanted readers, I think, to kind of take away from your exploration of this in general, or even just specifically for Booba or some of the other characters.
Certainly. I mean, I think it was necessary for Booba to be sort of composed this way because it allowed me, oddly enough, access to many more places than I would have otherwise been granted. And I say this like I'm not the one writing the story or anything like that, but like, there are certain spaces that he can go into because of one half of who he is, and
Mm-hmm.
there are other spaces that he can go into because of the other half of who he is. And that allowed me to more freely explore the world that this story takes place in and really show, how in some cases stratified and like clearly delineated certain worlds are, but at the same time, how much they can be brushing up against each other sometimes physically. So yeah, that was probably the main impetus behind having this character who is so defined by his in-betweenness. But I also wanted to like I didn't want that to be like, the tragic dimension of his character or what have you. I wanted because at least in my personal life, a lot of people that I've known in positions, similar to his, there's a sort of, this isn't all of them, not by any stretch of the imagination. Some of these people are just like very charming and they're able to navigate particularly social situations in a way that's just like, it's deft. It's
Hmm.
like because they've so there's this particular level or brand of vigilance and being able to decipher things and know where you are, know who you're around, like all of that stuff. And so I thought it would be very interesting to have a character who, yes, there's this unsettled part of him, but also he kind of knows how to use that as a weapon. He can use his identity as a key to unlock certain doors that otherwise would have been barred to him.
I'm glad you brought that up because it made me wonder about building Booba's character in particular. And when you were we were talking about the betweenness, and part of the element of that I was thinking about was the ways in which you're saying stratified. I was thinking like the dress in particular, because he makes a number of jokes about the French in particular. Like they brought the cold with them because they're always in these full, colonial garb and dresses, and they're like have parasols, even though there's trees and like all of these kinds of things. And there's a stark contrast between that and the people sort of on the other side of the city who are really from here, who have found all these unique ways to just stay cool, and it is seemingly very normal things to do instead of dressing. And that I love that visual stratification too, of you can immediately tell sort of where someone is from. Most of the time you can kind of tell
Mhm.
where people are from almost by how they carry themselves in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, where you're from lives in your bones, right? Like, even if you made every effort in your life to like try to disclaim where you're from, even that very effort speaks to where you come from. Like, how you talk. Like, I saw Sinners a couple nights back, and
Yeah.
so I've been obsessively watching like Ryan Coogler interviews ever since. And like that is an Oakland dude. Like the way that he talks, the way that he moves, like like all of like that dude, like he's Oakland. Like you're like, oh, like he's from there. And so it's like that's a that's a very specific example of like one of the ways in which, and particularly if you're a writer too, like this is a very like not like a cheat sheet kind of way, but something to think about if you're trying to figure out how to render a character specific is like how does where they're from influence like how they walk or
Hmm.
how they talk? Does it impact their relationship to the sun? Like, will they, bring out a parasol when it's really bright out? Or are they, unafraid of the sun, as you might put it? Yeah, like that seemed to me really interesting to explore and like really fun to play with as well.
I could tell you were having fun with that. Yeah, there are a bunch of little joke moments in here. It's a novel that you wouldn't think would be funny, but at moments it is a hoot. There's just these little barbs that especially the main character throws out. I also love the part where he's got this big beefy guy holding him on a wagon, and he like jabs him in the kidney, and to get back at him he like leans a little close and like leans on him, and he can't do anything because they're basically breaking the law right now. And so this guy has to have this man like loving up on his side with all the images that conjures, and he can't do anything about it.
Yeah,
Just these little things. I love
he's
it.
like, I'm gonna get you back. I'm gonna get you back.
I'll pay for it later, but I'm still gonna get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because Bubakar is he feels and seems powerless through a lot of the book. He's doing other people's bidding, asking questions that seem pointless, getting beaten up a lot. But as you say, there's a lot of little moments where he is, even if it's just being sassy or whatever. But it seems a lot of people in a society also have their heads down, just trying to survive day to day. Gradually for Booba and very suddenly for a lot of society, everything changes. So I was wondering if you could just talk about how you lead up to and execute turning points for characters and how that's involved with flashpoints for whole societies.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, and this is the romantic in me where, you know, I I can sometimes picture like the narrative currents in individual lives
Mm,
corresponding with like the story of a nation. Right? Like that's always appealed to me, this idea of the individual and their story being twinned with the story of the collective. And like, because you think about like, even in the United States, people who live through, say for instance, somebody who, was just coming of age in Jim Crow and lived to see Obama
mm,
get elected president.
mhm,
That is a narrative arc right there. Like that, oh my goodness. Like, and so like things like that are very, very, very interesting to me. And so, in this novel, it's a bit more condensed with regards to, as you point out, the flashpoints and whatnot, but it really to me is all about the effect that a thing or an event or what have you has on the people, right? A word like tariff on its own doesn't have to be scary, but when it's translated into, you go into Costco and like shelves are empty, that's
mhm.
scary, right? Like that sort of thing, right? I
Yeah.
know when, I graduated college at the height of the Great Recession, and at the time, I know anybody who graduated college between '08 and 2010 deserves like a Presidential Medal of Freedom. If you made it through that and you're still around, like, yo, hats off to you. This is only our like third or fourth, generational economic crisis. But
Mm,
neither here nor there. But I remember at the time there was all this talk about all these financial terms, and people were talking about, mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps and austerity and this, that, and the third. And I, at the time, was very interested in seeing how those things translated into the lived reality of people who had just lost their home or, just lost their job at their bank due to downsizing or because the bank crashed because they were highly leveraged and they couldn't pay off their debts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now this person who had just started their job out of, whatever college at whatever investment bank or whatever, their prospects are going like that. That to me has always been the interesting thing. And so that focus on the personal married with like I was a poli sci major in college, and so I was all about like political economy and like all the big like bloodless terms and whatnot. So you put those two things together, that interest in the personal and that fascination with political concepts and events of political upheaval. And that to me is what can create or what can help me build a rhythm and a personal narrative that can dovetail with the flashpoints of the political convulsions that occur periodically throughout the novel. It's sort of like thinking of the nation as a person.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, sort of thinking about the characteristics, how a city almost, or a nation in this case, almost lives in its own way,
mhm.
Yeah,
and then manifested through your characters as well, by way how they behave and how they react to stimulus, or
exactly.
as Trish was saying, the flashpoints, the cultural flashpoints that occur.
Yeah, what does a nation having a heart attack look like, or a nation having a stroke look like, right? Like, what does that
Well,
look
I feel
like?
it
Mm,
right now.
Yeah, no, it's like, let me look out my window real quick.
mm, yeah.
It's looking real strokey outside.
Oof, boy, there are days, man. Let me tell you. I mean, it is not as bad, obviously, as revolution and so on, which I suppose is worse than a stroke. I guess.
Yeah, it's debatable.
Debatable. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I like that image though. Like, what does a nation that's sort of having a heart attack look like, right? Things seizing up and stopping, and stuff that should be moving normally. That circle this a little bit back to like the Battle of Algiers, right? Which is sort of this dramatic presentation of a very real fight that took place, right? And I'm sure you're very well aware, right? There's all of these ways in which the French parts of the city are all just doing things as per usual, and then a bomb goes off and blows up a cafe, and that has immediately a dramatic impact on how the rest of the city operates from that moment
Mhm.
on.
Absolutely.
And it's visually very brilliantly presented at that. And you do very similar things here at the very early in the story. For example, when we get the I would argue probably the first fantasy supernatural question mark moment, right, with where we see the body for the first body that we see, and the way in which that's presented to us as this square that would normally not be a spectacle in this manner, with people just piled on. And I don't know if you did this on purpose, but when I was reading Boubacar moving through this, I was immediately going, oh, there's a protest or something, and he doesn't want to be here because he doesn't want to get caught in a protest. Because that's what it felt like to me. And then when we see what's actually happening, I was like, oh no, that's worse. This is way worse, because that's a visual representation of some sort of thing, it just like poisons the city at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like, yeah, no, it's almost like you're the camera over his shoulder following him
Mm.
through as he's like jostling through the crowd, and you hear it, the crowd being restless and everything, and like, oh, what's going on? Is it about to pop off? And then you get to the center and you're like, oh, this is this is not that. This is definitely not that.
It's much more horrifying.
Yeah.
So, Trish, I know you have a question that's about the fantastical
Yeah,
components,
and
and I figured I'd turn that to you because I think this is a good place for us to segue to
right.
that.
Prince Justin also in chat was asking as to the use of surrealism in the book, and what I had been thinking was that the fantastical elements in this book do seem almost surrealist. Just there for the point of making everything almost too absurd and making you question, what is reality? What's even happening here? To me, the incidents of floating seemed kind of like how violent phenomena can sort of be frozen in time. There's a picture in your head where the explosion is happening and it's just stuck there. Is that a little bit of maybe what was going on with in your mind when you came up with that, or how did you do that? And relatedly, is floating as such related to any particular African beliefs, lore, whatever, or was it just a fantasy element you created entirely from your imagination?
Yeah, the floating thing was just, I was like, what looks cool?
Uh-huh.
Like oftentimes with my writing, particularly with my speculative fiction, it's very, at least when I'm in the early developmental stages, it's very imagistic.
Ah,
Just like what looks cool, what like feels cool, what looks interesting. Like, going back to Beast Made of Night, my YA debut, that novel started with a single image of like a little boy seen from behind facing off against a giant shadow monster. Like
oh,
that
cool.
was that was the book that was the very beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
With War Girls, the very first image that I had was of a girl tinkering with her metal arm, like her detached metal arm on a workbench in like the early morning in her refugee camp, like that. And that's the very first scene in the book. And like, but like the novel came from that. And so with floating, like I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I sort of dug a little deeper into my psyche, to be like, okay, Tochi, why are you fascinated by this image? And I think it goes to what you were alluding to with regards to the freezing of the violence and this idea that it's almost like there's this thing that has happened that's been turned into this giant like monument or thing in the city that you have to see every time you walk by. Like every time you walk by on your way to the library, you have to pass this
Mm-hmm.
thing and it's not going anywhere. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like you can't get rid of it. It's just there. Like when I was a kid, I grew up mostly in this like dying post-industrial factory town in Connecticut. And Stanley Works, actually, the company used to be headquartered there. And there was this huge like factory, like huge factory that, we used to drive by on my way to grade school. And I always knew that factory as this like desiccated husk, like broken windows, greenery all over it, like vines
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, completely
Mm-hmm.
empty, like the type of place that ghost stories happen in.
Right.
And it was like this shattered monument to a place, that we drove by
Mhm.
every single day on
Mhm.
my way to school. And so I was like, it almost looked like an environmental incident. Like it almost looked like something had been stricken by lightning or had been set on fire, like fire had happened to it or something. And so I was like, okay, what happens if something that had the effect of, say, an earthquake or something that had the effect of a hurricane or a natural disaster were just like frozen there and you couldn't avoid it. And then when you go into, the issue of colonialism and the idea that there are horrible things that have happened and the idea of trying to erase the history of that, erase the record of that to
Mhm.
launder people's reputations, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, the metaphor is just like, oh yeah, it's all there. It's all there.
That's really interesting. That
Out of
reminds me of Ursula Vernon's What Feasts at Night. Actually, there the main character is a former soldier who is still dealing with a lot of PTSD. His their perspective is that the his I beg Alex's pardon in the character. Their perspective is that they are not having flashbacks to the past. Their perspective is that the war is always happening, just kind of overstep, across the borderland, and you're back in the war again. It's just always there, always happening, always traumatizing. Um, and the frozen violence of floating, although it's not quite floating, people are rotating in the air and stuff like that, but they are they are not falling the way that
Yeah.
explosions usually happen. So that just reminds me of that a little bit.
have by any chance have either of you read Don DeLillo's Falling Man?
No.
No, but I'm a big Don DeLillo stan. But like I know the cover of Falling Man. Like I know that. And what's interesting about it is there was a piece in Esquire like a decade and a half ago that was about the photo, like the famous photo of the Falling Man. And I think there's something of that image just like buried in my psyche.
I mean, people wrote like they like conspiracied about the original image, right? Of you know, because it's captured at like a moment in time and the way he looks when he's falling, right? Everybody comes up with these stories about like it was deliberate and all of these kinds of things. And DeLillo takes that to like a really disturbing level because there's basically like a shock artist, like a Banksy type shock artist who mimics the image and like does it over like overpasses of bridges and sets it up so that he falls in front of cars so people think he's falling in front of them, and he's like deliberately traumatizing people in New York City, and at the same time as all these people are just trying to have their normal lives. It's a very interesting book. It's not one of his most loved, but I think that's because it might have come a little too soon after 9/11 for it. I'll be honest. 2007, I think, is when it
Oh
comes out.
wow,
So,
yeah.
but you made me think a lot about this. That right, that there's a sort of like reliving of the frozenness, but also like we have to like relive every memory we have about that as well. And that comes with. I think it'd be fair to say that like Boubacar is traumatized by, even just in the beginning of the novel, that there's like a way in which it seeps into his psyche, his soul, or whatever we want to call it. He has this like nightmare dream state that is really, really discomforting and really uncomfortable. And it's interesting how he keeps telling us he's done all of these other, like I've found people's kids, and like sometimes those stories don't end nice, but this one is the one that like really gets him. It like seeps into him really, really well. And it made me wonder, is it that he's just experienced so much and he's hit the breaking point, or is it there's something deeper going on with this particular incident that is like hitting all of the right like little strings inside of him?
I mean,
um
I think
I don't know that I necessarily had the answer,
yeah,
but you might.
no, I mean, I think that's exactly the type of thing that is up to the reader to decide. Like exactly that question. Like, is it, he's already seen so much, right? Like what's special about this one in particular that's got him? Is it just where he is at his life? Is it
Hmm.
the age that he's at? Like, the stage in his life that he's arrived at. Um, where, if he were in his early to mid 30s, maybe he'd be dealing with this a little differently. So is it a breaking point thing, or is it that there's something specific to this thing that is like scratching the itch in him?
Yeah, there are a couple of points in the book where he refers to people he meets and thinks about them as though they're the right age to be his children. And so that I was wondering if that might have been kind of a thing for him, is that, the girl who shows up at his apartment bleeding and then disappears, if he just feels like a bit of a father figure. Um, well, not really, but kind of. Maybe that's just something going on subconsciously. But also, speaking of relationships with younger children, I really enjoyed Booba's relationship with the urchin. I loved how it starts with them both kind of trying to scam each other a little bit. I loved that it was never really confirmed whether the urchin does or does not have a pack of associates who are backing him or not. Is he making it all up to make himself sound better, or does he really have people, running for him who just never show up on camera, as it were? I love the uncertainty of all of that, but their evolving relationship and eventually trust in each other was just super fun to watch.
Yeah, the urchin is maybe my favorite character to have written in that book. He was so much fun. He was so much fun. Like, I don't it had been a long time since I'd had that much fun with a single character. Like, he's so scammy, but he's so charming. So charming. Like, you want to hear him out. You know he's got his hand in your pocket, but you just want to hear him out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. But in the end, he does come through with some things that help Booba quite a lot. So he's obviously got something behind his talk, that
Oh,
some
absolutely.
actual ability. Yeah. So just enormous fun.
So I want to ask a writing question, because at the very beginning of us, you talking about like what the book is kind of about, and we're talking about the your intentions for when you went into making this book. You had mentioned that you had written works that are, I think you used the, I don't know if I got the right word, but like it sounded like you said kind of like difficult books that are like they really require the reader to be very like attentive. And this book, I don't know that I would say it does reward you for being attentive, I would say, but doesn't necessarily require you to be like what I did, where like literally for folks at home, like I went back and started marking things with the little like sticker tags, because there were things in there that I thought they were really, really important moments in the book, and there were things that you were saying that there was like deep history and so on. And I guess my question to you as a sort of writer is, how do you kind of navigate that that I don't know if I want to call it tension between sort of what you want to do with the book and what you expect the reader's experience to be of the book, and to some degree sort of realistically dealing with the fact that readers are going to approach your work very differently depending on what kind of work you've written, but even themselves, how they may approach it and what they'll get from it by approaching it.
Yeah, it's funny. Harmattan Season is probably the most audience forward book I've written,
Hmm.
where because normally the way that I write, I'm the only reader.
Oh,
It's like, I know Rick Rubin was doing an interview with this music producer who has this YouTube channel, Rick Beato, and he was talking about System of a Down, my favorite band
yeah.
of all time, like hands down, absolute favorite. I cried when they broke up. And Rick Rubin was talking about the uniqueness of System's sound, particularly like in the beginning. and the magic that was them blowing up, but the fact too that before that happened, there were people that just didn't get it, or that just like hated it, or like, this is so weird, this is too different, I don't get it. What is all this stuff that they're putting together? But the magic with them lay in the fact that they were, and by they I mean the band and Rick with the band, they were making music for themselves.
Mm.
And I think when you do that, there's this sort of implicit trust in the audience to meet it, if if that's the right way to put it. Whether it's like catching up to it, whether it's slowing down enough to hear it, like that they will rise to the thing. So that's sort of how I'd done everything up through Goliath. And Goliath was really the most like me book ever, because it's all over the place. It's like, okay, what's happening when? What's this character doing here? Like, are they, wait, is this his mom? I'm not sure. Like, what is going on here? But there was a lot in it that I was super proud of as a writer, and this idea of, for instance, grafting the identity of Goliath from the Old Testament onto an entire population, and situating that in the David versus Goliath mythos in the context of, like, neo colonialism in the aftermath of climate crisis. Like, when I explain it like this, it sounds super complicated, super 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 complicated. But I was really happy with like how I pulled it off. Me and the like maybe like 200 people who read the book. And then with Harmattan season, I was like, okay, how can I do something that's a little bit different? How can I do something where I'm a little bit more aware of reader expectations, and not to play into expectations, but to play into them, then subvert them?
Mm.
Like, how can I write a book? And I'd never done this before. How can I write a book where I can try to guess where the reader's going to be at a particular point? How do I disperse information,
Mm.
in the way that I need to in order to do that? Like, and that's one of the things that writing in this genre, writing in the mystery, detective fiction, crime fiction genre forces you to do, is it forces you to be very strategic about how you disperse information. Like,
Yes.
extremely strategic. So I had to be very intentional about it in a way that I hadn't necessarily had to be before, where, Goliath aside, my stories were relatively like straightforward in that there was always like forward movement. You could more or less tell what was going on at any given moment and whatnot. Now, here, I needed the reader to know things, and I needed them to know things by a certain point. Then what if they guess a thing too early? What do I do then? How do I combat that? Like, okay, is this red herring too much? Is it not enough? Do I need to lay it on a little thicker? Like, what do I? So like, it was actually kind of fun, like putting myself in those shoes for a little bit and trying to, because like the thing is, the reader's always going to be smarter. There's always going to be a reader that's smarter than me, and that can put it together. Like, that's what Reddit's for. Like, really, like that's what Reddit's like. You'll have a puzzle that you put together that is just like, oh, this is unbreakable. And then literally 2 minutes later on Reddit, somebody's going to have a screenshot of how they, step by step, breaking it down, how they solve that puzzle. So, you can't beat that person. You can't beat that person. But you can try to, to the best of your abilities, put together something that is entertaining, and that I think most importantly rewards investment.
Oh, it absolutely rewards careful reading. There was a point toward the end of the book where he shows up in somebody's office, and I just slid right past that opening paragraph. He shows up and closes a window and starts talking to the guy, and then several pages later there's a wait what moment, and I'm like, wait, what happened right there? And so I go back to the beginning of the chapter and reread the paragraph, and oh, he did say that. I just missed it. I love that kind of moment.
Yeah. There are quite a few. There are quite a few in this book, and there are. I mean, I obviously went back because I had to mark some things because I was like, I have to remember these. But there are just these really wonderful little moments in here where you sort of give us these details, and then later on, those details become really, really
Yes.
important. And you have this way of doing it where you just like give us some stuff, and it's like, oh well, that's not important, right? And then later on, it's like, oh no, no, that thing was actually really important. and and if you remember it, you're like, wait a minute, I remember this. Kind of what you're describing, Trish. Like some of these markings were things was like, oh, that's a foreshadowing, or the way that you talk about this cultural thing will come up in a different way later on, and so we'll see those interconnections. It's I don't know how you did that because I don't know how any of these mystery writer detective fiction I don't know how any of them do it. Like it how do you they must have like the most do you have like a
Spreadsheet.
whiteboard of sticky notes like this just all with strings, like is it that conspiracy image from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
Right.
I'm glad you know what I'm talking about.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about. No, it's funny. I'm the most jazz improvisationalist writer that you might ever be. Like, I'm so like I like to think that I do have elements of organization, but I've never like implemented a spreadsheet in any part of my writing process. I don't use spreadsheets in life. Like I don't that's just it's so much of it. Well, like I think the thing for me that, and I guess this can be a sort of like writing thing for all my writers in the chat. I am a very intuitive writer, and I find that gut feeling has more often than not led me in the right direction. And if I go back after having executed on my gut feeling and I think about why I felt the way that I felt about this choice, I can then sort of articulate where it came from and why I made that choice and things like that. But so much of it, particularly initially, boils down to, does this feel right?
Mm.
And I think being able to trust your gut also comes from having internalized all the like rules and lessons and all that stuff, like all the practice that you've done before. It's like, you wake up at like 6 a.m. to go shoot jump shots in the gym for 3 hours every Saturday for like months and months and months. And then one day, all of a sudden, you're not even thinking about it and you just like hit your shot. And then you hit it again. And then you hit it again. And you're just flowing. And I think if you can train to get to that place where you can trust your intuition, that I think will just like open the gates to you as a writer. Because then like a lot of times, like when you get to the place where you kind of where you can trust yourself, like at least for me, I've had to like dial back the arrogance a little bit and be like, I know what I'm doing, but also be able to like explain what I'm doing instead of just being like, no, 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 don't worry about it. Trust me, I got this. I know what I'm doing. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Like, but yeah, it helps if you're able to, after the fact, explain or articulate, at least to yourself, why you made that particular narrative choice. But yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of this is just like feel for me. I'm just like playing a guitar solo.
Got it. You're Steve Vai.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, great.
Cool.
Well, we have to wind down now.
Ooh, I was having so
I'm
much fun.
sorry,
Yeah.
but I told you 45 minutes to an hour, and we're almost at an hour.
Time
Do
flies when
you
you're
want to
having
go
fun.
to 3 a.m.?
No,
We can do that.
like I said before the show, I got a Cyberpunk playthrough that's waiting for me. So as much as I would love to, um, Johnny Silverhand's calling my name.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, one of the last two really quick questions is so this book comes out May 27th, 2025. And so the natural question you would ask is like, what is the thing you're working on that you're allowed to tell us about, I suppose, that's coming next or that you're at least playing around with?
So, a couple things. I have an essay collection coming out in October called Race Book: A Personal History of the Internet, available for pre-order everywhere books are sold. But it was really fun because I dabbled in essays before, but I'd never really like immersed myself in the form and started to think critically about the composition of a collection, sort of like putting together an album, really. And it was a lot of fun. Like I have an essay in there about the metaverse. I mean, the thing about writing about the internet and like tech is that it outruns you so fast. Like there's an essay in there about the metaverse that would have freaking rocked in 2023 that like is like gonna be outdated by the time this book comes out in October. But no, it was so much. I had so much fun writing, that book. There's a essay about androids in there. There are plenty of essays about gaming because I don't know that I'm a capital G gamer, but I game, I game. I have Game Pass, I have a PS Plus account, like I game. But yeah, so that's coming out in October, Racebook, A Personal History of the Internet. And I recently turned in to my publisher a draft for a Western.
Ooh.
Whoa. Oh, you're just going to jump around all the genres.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of Mieville up in this piece.
That's great.
Fantastic.
So, while you're doing all this stuff, if people have enjoyed this interview and want to find out more about you, how can they find you on like the social medias and things?
Y'all can find me on Blue Sky at Tochi True Story. Y'all can find me on Instagram at Trey64. That is TREIZE 64. I have a Substack, tochionyebuchi.substack.com. The title is Italic. And I have a website, like a regular website, tochionyebuchi.com for news and updates. I know I should start streaming on Twitch again. I know this. So hold out hope that I will finally get my life together enough to stream my umpteenth Shadow of the Erdtree playthrough.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Tochi. We appreciate it.
Oh, again, a pleasure and an honor. This was so much fun. So much fun.
It went by really fast,
It
by the way.
did.
They're saying that in chat,
Yeah.
too. Like, can you believe that's an hour? We did a whole ass hour.
That is wild.
Oh, crazy. Well, for folks at home, if you'd like to let us know what you thought about the episode, if you've read the book, or I don't know, you just want to tell us that you thought the episode was good, or you thought the book was good, or we're probably not going to like forward your questions to Tochi because I feel like that's not necessarily what we're there for, but you can find Tochi on the internet, so you can probably ask that way. But the best way to do it would be our email, skiffingfanny@gmail.com. And then we have a Discord as well, so if you're a part of that, you can go and let us know your thoughts on the episode there. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a whole bunch of other places. Our shows come out in video and audio form on our YouTube channel, and then audio form on our website, and then all the RSS feeds. And you can find the links to all that at skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings. And then we are on Twitch, again, every Friday, 7 p.m. Central for whatever we happen to be doing that night. And that's at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/skiffyandfanty, in case you want to give us all of your hard-earned money, or at least $1 of it. Or if it's not a US dollar, whatever currency you've got that you are able to give us and that doesn't involve you not eating. So food first. Eat first, make sure you're fed. And obviously any meds or whatever that you need. Anyway, I'm at SeanDuke.net, SeanDuke.net/DukeThings if you want to find me on socials. And then I'm here on Alphabet Streams Wednesdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. for game stuff.
All right, and you can find me, Trish, on Blue Sky at P.E. Matson, on Mastodon at Trishy M at newsy.social, on my blog, what'sthewordnow.blogspot.com, and I also review things pretty frequently at skiffyandfancy.com.
All right, as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, I have to make this happy, which is hard to do with given the book we just read, which is not necessarily a happy book per se, although it has happy moments. But I'm gonna soldier on and figure it out. It's got a cure.
It's a hopeful ending, anyway. It's hopeful.
It is a hopeful ending. You know what? I'll do it this way. I'm going to buy Tochi's other book when it comes out because I want to read it. And so that will be my happy ending, which is that already Tochi has sold me on the next book, so I'm going to buy it. So there we go. And on that note, happy ending and see you. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.